If we could shift degrees a little bit, Albert Goldson asks about the. No, he notes, Albert is a member of the OPC board, that Russia has revoked a protocol about the protection of victims of international armed conflicts. And how would this protect Ukrainians maybe taken prisoner in partisan warfare? And it's a little bit of a fine point. And maybe, Brian, you could take a shot at that, and welcome back. And before we get there, I'd like to tell panelists that in the, I guess it was 6 years I lived in Ukraine, no one ever migrated, no one moved to the Russian-controlled sections. It was kind of like asking a South Korean, well, why don't you move to North Korea if you don't like it? I mean, it really, people would go to the Russian-controlled sections, to bring money to their families or to bring their families out. And there's been massive emigration from those areas. And one reason why in some areas in 2013, 2014, there's sort of fuzzy feeling like, oh, well, maybe better to take over by Russia. I'm talking about Odessa and Kharkiv. That's gone because people have been able to watch for the last 8 years how Russia has managed these areas. They're economically dead. There's no free press. There's no free elections. There are torture camps. And there's massive emigration. And a lot of people live there are pensioners because the option is to stay in your apartment in Donetsk or live under a bridge in Kyiv. I mean, I don't mean to be that dramatic, but they have their house, so they stay there. But people vote with their feet, and virtually no Ukrainians have migrated out of ideological sympathy or whatever to Donetsk and Luhansk, to the controlled areas. Brian, you have a good handle on politics. If we have partisan warfare developing, how do you think Russia would treat its prisoners, and how do you think they would fight against a guerrilla warfare in Ukraine? I'm not talking about Western Ukraine, we know the history, I'm talking about Eastern Ukraine.
Well, sure, Jim, and just to add to your point about Odessa and Kharkiv, I do recall in 2014 having dinner with a group of businessmen, one of which was Jewish, and the topic had come up about, Crimea and what the destabilization efforts. And he said, Brian, don't worry about Odessa. Odessa's never going to join Russia. Now, if the question was about joining Israel, no, that's something to consider. But some good Odessa humor there for you. But I mean, that's a real question. I mean, there have been Ukrainian prisoners, there's constant prisoner exchanges going on. And this has been an issue. Most of the people that the Ukrainian prisoners that have been imprisoned by the Russians, and this is not exactly Scandinavian prison treatment here. This is it's pretty tough. I know some people who've done time in Russian prisons, not just military, but civilians. And so we can imagine, what little adherence Russia has to international law and international treaties. Even if there are signatories to certain treaties and procedures, we can expect, though, that the prisoners are not going to be treated well. I think it's safe to say to expect the worst. British intelligence released a few days ago the report, I believe it was Thursday last week, about planned assassinations and list of Ukrainians who would be rounded up and targeted for removal. So anytime you have a country putting out assassination list, that's not a good, that does not bode well for anyone who's going to be a potential prisoner of Russia.
Yeah, I mean, Brian, I've been down to Luhansk and Donetsk, to the government-controlled areas. If there's a breakthrough, do you think some individuals will wave their hand in the air and say, well, I'll be mayor for the Russian-controlled Donetsk? Or do you think most of them will keep their heads down and many will just kind of emigrate out of the area? I mean, how do you think the population there will react to a Russian onslaught?
Well, there certainly will be people who say, yeah, this is my chance. I want to, I've been waiting for this. Now's my time. Brother Russia has come to liberate me. But I think two things. One, there'll certainly be those people, and let's use a phrase, to describe them. I would say we would be naive not to think that Russia does not have sleeper cells of people who, have been waiting for such a scenario. Now, the issue for those people, though, is if you look at the LNR, DNR, all the leaders are imported. They're not locals, right? So the LNR, DNR leadership is imported from Russia. So I think Ukrainians who are thinking that Russia was going to recognize their great talents and trust them to administer some of these cities or regions in the case it goes that far, I think they're naive, and I think they're deluding themselves. Russia will almost certainly have their handpicked people put in place in these towns and cities. The greater the importance of the city, the greater the likelihood it'll be a handpicked person from Moscow.
So there will be no Quislings, the Norwegian leader under the Nazi occupation in Norway, who I think ended up executed in 1946. So it's not a good. I hope they have life insurance, but I don't think there's much of a future of that.